And some friends of mine invited me to do a guided psilocybin or magic mushroom experience. And at first I said no, and they kind of persuaded me that it would be good for me. So,
Well, hey, Matt, welcome to the show. How are you?
Rafi, I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited about touching into this what can be a very controversial topic, but before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what got you to what you're doing now, and maybe even mention the book a little bit, and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation at hand about psychedelics and their use.
Happy to do all of the above, Rafi. So I was not a drug user and not even a big drinker. And some friends of mine invited me to do a guided psilocybin or magic mushroom experience. And at first I said no, and they kind of persuaded me that it would be good for me. So I'm all right with that. I went ahead and embarked. And it completely changed the way I look and interact with the world. In this initial experience, I reconnected with my mom, who died when she was 49. I was 22. I had a number of insights into things I was doing with my life and with my relationships that weren't serving me. And I emerged from this experience and said, "Oh my gosh, I need to know more about this. What happened?" I ended up going back to school to get a master's in psychology and neuroscience at a relatively late age, and then ended up writing a book called Psychedelics for Everyone. And in this book, I try to not only tell some personal stories of my experience, but put a lot of information about psychedelics in general, what they're used for, and then kind of molecule or compound by compound, what people might want to consider if they're considering using those medicines.
Yeah, because I mean, you hear it every now and then. It's almost one of those like fringe things, like oh, psychedelics, you're one of those crackpots. So I guess let's just start with a very foundation, like how you define what is a psychedelic. Are they addictive? What are the harms around them? Obviously, there's legality issues, right? Like they're illegal in a lot of places and stuff like that. But let's start with the basics, like what constitutes a psychedelic, and then are there any precautions that we need to be aware of, and then we'll dive into like why you might want to use them.
Sure. So lots of questions baked in there. When we talk about a psychedelic, we're talking about a mind opening and oftentimes a heart opening medicine. So here in the United States, the only legal psychedelic is ketamine. It's
Okay.
been an FDA approved drug since the 70s. It's been used off label, as many medicines are, for mental health since I think 74, and often used for depression, anxiety, OCD, eating disorders, substance use. Um, when people, though, typically think about psychedelics, they're thinking about LSD, magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, those types of psychedelics, which are not yet legal here in the States. Although psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and um, MDMA, which a lot of us knew as ecstasy when we were younger, those have both been given FDA breakthrough therapy designations. And the MDMA has finished its phase 3 clinical trials, and psilocybin is seeming on the home stretch.
Okay. All right. And what do these? So what do they do? Like, what is it? I guess they're physiologically. What are they doing to the person who takes them? I guess we can start from there and then kind of talk about how that impacts their psychology or whatnot, their perception of reality. Right.
Absolutely. And let's also, while we're doing this, let's also address your question about addiction, because with the
Oh
exception
yeah.
of ketamine and MDMA, most of these psychedelic medicines are really not addictive. They're anti-addictive, which means in like animal studies, when animals are given a choice of hitting the button for food or hitting the button for the drug, they're going to take food in most cases. So just something to be aware of with ketamine. Again, it's the only legal one, but it is something that people, it's a powerful drug, and used recreationally it can lead to addiction. So it's something for people to be aware of. um, so then you ask, what do these medicines do? So let's talk about that from a couple of different standpoints. First, let's talk about kind of what's happening in your brain when you take a psychedelic. So it's going to do a few things. It's going to, and if you think about you, as we get older, we get into kind of repetitive thoughts. And
Yeah.
we literally, behind the scenes, our neurotransmitters, our neurons are firing in specific patterns. And we went from being a child where there's a whole bunch of neurons firing to, as we got older, less and less neurons are firing. But when we take a psychedelic, a bunch more that used to fire are going to fire again. Your brain kind of comes alive. And that literally is like your brain remembering how it used to think. And it can knock us off of kind of the patterns that we've developed as we've grown older. Second thing that's happening is we all have this thing called a default mode network. So think of this as like your inner narrator, the voice that's, oh, Rafi, you're not good enough, or you can't write a book, or your podcast is never going to work, and all these negative things that are telling us all the time. But with the psychedelic, it's going to quiet that down. That's going to all go away. And that for a lot of people is like, wow, the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. I can feel it. And then for many people, the third thing that happens is there's some type of connection both to nature and other people and to a higher power, whatever that means for that person. And that also, it's like, okay, so I'm not alone in this world. I can feel safe and loved in this experience that I'm living. And I can think about what do I want to do next differently than I did before the psychedelic. And you put all of that together, and it's a pretty powerful technology for change, for spiritual connection, um, for humanity. So and the last thing I'll say on this is it's not a cure. So let's not think of it like we think about, oh, you're going to take this medicine, it's going to cure you from whatever you're going to do. No, it's a catalyst. It's going to open up your mind, make you feel a lot of love, show you a new way of thinking. And then what's really important is what happens after that. You have some type of integration practice where you can put these thoughts and ideas into reality, into this consensus reality in which we live. Does that all make sense, Rafi? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. It's making sense for sure. So I get the idea. I'm glad you made the distinction of like, this is not a cure all. It's not like you're taking it for pain and then you don't have pain anymore, but it's really, as you said, it's a mind altering or mind opening experience. And almost, I could see it after hearing you explain it, like, oh, I could see this being used in something like maybe behavioral health or maybe areas of depression or something like that, giving somebody a little bit of a dose, if you would, that helps them open up their mind, the world around them, and maybe experiencing things differently. And then they can take that experience back to maybe a counselor or a psychologist and kind of put the plan in place. Am I off base with that?
I think you're right on it. And it can be a licensed person like a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist, or it can be an unlicensed coach that's just familiar with this practice. But having someone to help process, and in many cases, even having a community that you can return to is helpful. But at least someone for the integration practice. You know, you talked about behavioral, or let's talk about post traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, I
So
saw you've done some work in that area. So talk to me about it.
yeah, I mean, so there's a group called the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, which is founded by Rick Doblin, and they have been working since 1986 to re-legalize MDMA. And they've raised, I don't know, $150 million, lots and lots of money to go through the drug legalization process here in America. And they just finished the phase 3 clinical trial. So now let's put, for you and for the listeners, let's imagine a veteran, a first responder, a victim of sexual assault, where they've tried everything. They've tried talk therapy, they've tried the existing antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. Nothing's worked. So they have what's called treatment resistant post traumatic stress disorder. So nothing's worked. They have been put through a series of therapy and 3 MDMA sessions. And in these phase 3 clinical trials, heavily regulated, heavily monitored, 67% no longer qualify as having PTSD at the end of this.
Oh, wow.
It's a huge number. So what happened to them? It's everything we just talked about. It's the shame, blame, and guilt goes away. They're able to look at these experiences and realize, okay, these experiences happened to me, but they don't define me. They're able to think in a way that they weren't able to think. They're able to process, and then they're able to move forward. And that's incredible for people who have not had an option. There's been nothing else until this. So MDMA really should be legalized in America across the country within 2 years, which is incredible.
Yeah, and then I guess so. I got a lot of questions shooting through my mind. My first one is like, okay, where are people like you learning about this kind of stuff? Because obviously, if if it's illegal, like it's very difficult to get access, not just to the substances themselves, but treatment protocols and the dosing and how it works, the what would make it work in a clinical setting, right? So where do people learn about this? Is this something that's been going on maybe overseas in other unregulated areas, and now they're coming back to the US? Or I guess what's the deal?
Yeah, so it's a two-part answer. What's wild, I did not know this. So psychedelics became illegal in America with what was called the Controlled Substances Act of
Yes.
1970. So effectively, anyone born 1971 to today, we have lived our life in a prohibition. We just didn't know it. We had heard about the alcohol prohibition growing up, but nobody told me, oh, there's also a drug prohibition. That's for our own good. We saw the Just Say No commercials, and
Yeah.
here's your mind on drugs, and it's going to fry this egg and stay away. But nobody said, oh, but before this, there were thousands of papers on the effectiveness and safety of psychedelic medicine. I didn't know that. I didn't know LSD alone for alcoholism is like 1,000 papers. That's a lot. So then in the late 90s, there started to be a crack in the door where some of the academic institutions started to be able to study psychedelics again, and it slowly has gained momentum. We're seeing groups like Johns Hopkins in Maryland just doing incredible research. But today, there are over 300 academic institutions actively studying psychedelic medicine. I live in North Carolina, so if I go to the left, I get to University of North Carolina, where Dr. Brian Roth's lab in the School of Medicine just received a $27 million grant from the effectively the Department of Defense, to try to remove the hallucinogenic property from a couple of the compounds. And then he's working with, at my school to the right, which is Duke, with the professor from there as part of the team. So Duke and UNC are playing nicely together in
Yeah. In
in
this
this
area.
particular arena. Doesn't normally happen. Um, but so there's all sorts of papers from really well established academic institutions here. And then you can look overseas: Imperial College of London, King's College London, schools in Scandinavia, Australia, all throughout Europe are studying this as well. So the research is just piling on right now in terms of and again, it's not a panacea. It doesn't work for everybody. That's not what we're saying, but it works for a lot of people on an incredibly wide variety of different challenges that people have, in addition to the spiritual connection component.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads into, so what would you say to somebody? I'm just thinking about like some of the arguments or maybe hesitancies that I've heard, especially around, we'll talk about microdosing in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But using these substances is that whoever takes the substance, right, is in a sense making them, maybe this is not correct and this is just the perception, but they're making themselves vulnerable to the inputs of, let's say, whoever's in the room that's not on these or has not taken the substances. And don't you place yourself at risk if you were to take a psychedelic in the in the presence of somebody who's got maybe nefarious motives, and they convince you to, I don't know, sign over your will or whatever, whatever. They take some kind of advantage of you. Like how big of a risk is that really? And I guess what kind of mitigation would be in place in something like this, where you're taking people that are, for lack of a better word, bruised and broken, people with PTSD, sexual trauma, you're making them vulnerable taking these drugs. Like, what kind of protections need to be in place or should be in place, or maybe already are in place, and it's just a big misconception?
Love this question. I think it's super important for people who are new to psychedelics to really think about this. So there's 3 S's that we talk about: source, set, and setting. So source is, if you're going to take a psychedelic, where did your drugs come from?
Yeah.
Are you
Hopefully not
sure
a
they
back
are what you
alley,
think
right?
they are? Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. There was a relatively recent study on MDMA where these scientists bought a bunch of street drugs, and something like 50% had zero MDMA in it. Um, and a chunk had fentanyl and a chunk had ketamine, but it wasn't what people thought. Maybe a third was, but it can be dangerous, and it is a challenge in our country because we don't have a open dialogue on drugs.
Yeah.
So people are forced to buy underground, and it leads to thousands and thousands and thousands of people dying every year. and it's awful. And let's not even get into the whole how many people are incarcerated. What does it cost our
Yeah.
society? We've chosen to spend money on law enforcement and a war on drugs instead of on education, enlightenment, self confidence, trauma reduction, all the things that would help people not to take drugs recreationally. Um, so anyhow, source becomes the first one. So if you're going to a licensed ketamine uh, professional, a doctor in your area, then you know your source is a pharmacy grade ketamine. Great. Okay. If you're not going to that type of experience and you're going to do an underground ceremony of some sort, yeah, find out where are they getting their medicine? Are they testing it? Do you really know what they have that it's pure? So let's put that in a bucket. That's your source.
Okay.
Your set refers to your mindset. Has whoever you're working with first done some type of medical screening to make sure that you're not taking anything else or have any family history that would make you not a good candidate? So that you know, okay, there's nothing physically that should be challenging with this experience. And then have they told me what am I going to take? How long is it going to last? Um, have they prepared me and what is my intention going into this? Those types of questions. That's all you're set so that you go into it in the mindset of I know what I'm doing. I'm prepared for this, and I'm prepared for what I might experience, and I'm ready. I want to do this. Great.
Yeah. Just
Which wait, sorry,
before
go
we
ahead.
move on to the next S, what
Yep.
might be one of those things that is like a red flag? Is it like drug interactions, or like what would
Yeah.
keep somebody from not being a good candidate for something like this?
On the family history side, what's typically said is okay, if you have a history of schizophrenia,
Okay.
this is
Yeah, that makes
probably not a
sense.
great
Yeah.
thing. If you have a history of psychotic breaks, it's probably not the right medicine. Bipolar, there's not a lot of research. If you're in a manic state, it's not the right
Okay.
time. But if you're in kind of a normal or depressive state, there are a number of people who work in this. And then that's on the family history. On the drug interactions, it really depends on, like, for instance, if you're taking an SSRI, you can take
Yeah.
ketamine. That's great. But you might not, half of the population can take psilocybin and have a good experience. Half doesn't really feel anything. If you're taking an MAOI, a lot of psychedelics have pretty strong interactions, can be really, really dangerous. And then there's a whole variety of things. And that's where having a medical intake reviewed by ideally a medical professional in that for that particular step is pretty important.
Yeah,
you don't want to hurt
exactly. You don't
yourself.
want to do something that's going to set you on the bad
No.
course. Okay. And then what's the final S here?
Hang on really quickly.
Okay.
On that, if you're curious and you want to have a medical opinion, there is a gentleman out there, Dr. Ben Malcolm, who goes the Spirit Pharmacist or spiritpharmacist.com, and he will do a medical consult with you no matter where you are in the country and say, okay, tell me all the medicines you're taking. What are you thinking about doing? He's not telling you to go do anything, but okay, I'm thinking about doing ayahuasca and these are the medicines I'm on. Okay. And he'll talk you through it. And this is a report and this is the risk. And this is what you need to do if you want to do it. So a spirit pharmacist is a good resource that's out there. The final S is setting. So this relates to where are you physically going to be when you take this medicine? How many people are going to be with you? What is the philosophy or the religious ideology of the person, if there is one, of the person who's leading that ceremony? What is their experience doing this? Do you know you're not going to be interrupted? Do you know you're safe? Do you know if you have to go to the bathroom that there's someone there who's going to help you go from point A to point B so that you don't fall? Those are all the setting things. And what research shows that if you have source, set, and setting all dialed in, the probability of a good experience of a positive experience is pretty high. But when you're missing one of those items, it cannot be ideal. So to your point, if you have somebody there who has not ideal motives, or he's going to take advantage of you in a vulnerable state, yeah, that's not a good setting to be in. And you are effectively incapacitated for this experience. So knowing that you have trust in your provider and in the people around you is super, super important.
Yeah. So I'm assuming then like the way this works is not like you go in for a consult on Tuesday and you're having one of these experiences on Friday. It's probably one of those things that over time, over maybe the course of a therapeutic relationship, you get to the point where, okay, we've talked about this, we've gotten, we've built up whatever kind of rapport or trust needs to be in place, both for the provider, but then also for the person who's going to have this experience, right? And then at that point, then it's okay to proceed as opposed to trying to rush it, right?
Now, you don't want to rush. I do think, and I'm going to go back to ketamine. Um, Ketamine is something that if you've gotten to the point where I don't want to take an antidepressant for the, and we can talk about that if we want to, or I've given up on antidepressants and I'm found my way to a ketamine doctor. In many cases, they will do a medical intake and say, you know what, okay, this is your preparation, work in this intention setting, and here's your medicine in 2 days. Go ahead and do your first journey, because you're talking about a 1 hour-ish journey, 40
Yeah.
minutes if it's IV, an hour if it's sublingual. That's about what we're talking about. So it can be relatively quick for your first psychedelic journey. With ketamine, you're typically going to take 6 journeys within 3, 4, 6 weeks on the outside, something like that. And then after that, you'll decide if for you, you need to do this anymore. That's how most doctors prescribe it. And then after, maybe, because it's not like an antidepressant where you're going to take this now every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It's which again, that shouldn't be like that either, but it's it might be, okay, I'm going to do this once a month, once a quarter, um, only when I have triggering events. It's a different experience. When we talk about underground psychedelic experiences, again, different than ketamine, you probably have gotten word of mouth. You've probably talked to somebody who said, "Oh, I had this incredible experience with this facilitator, and they're doing another retreat on this date." And then do you already have someone that you're working with as a therapist or a coach? If not, does that underground facilitator have those services? And then you figure out what's next and what's right for you.
Okay. Awesome. Moving on then, because you said it's going to take this journey is going to be what, 40 minutes to an hour. It's not going to be super, super long. I'm assuming dosing plays a huge role in this, obviously the type of substance as well. So one thing that you mentioned here in the book too is micro dosing. So why don't you tell us a little bit? I mean, it's in the name, but what do we mean by micro dosing? What is
Sure.
it? And kind of what are some common protocols and maybe yeah, I guess just give us kind of a high level overview of microdosing and we'll kind of dive in from there.
So when people talk about microdosing, they're talking about what's referred to as either a sub-perceptual or sub-intoxicating amount of the drug. So maybe 1/10 to 1/20th of a traditional dose. So little that you effectively can go about your day as if you didn't do it. You can drive, you can work, you can play with the kids, all those kinds of things if you dialed it in correctly.
So
Um,
this is not like what we were just describing. This is a completely different thing then. Okay.
Completely different animal. Yes. So microdosing is many people do it because they feel that it adds connectivity. It makes the blue skies bluer, the gray skies less gray. It helps with focus. There's a number of reasons. Research is split on this. There's some
Okay.
research that says, it's basically a placebo. And there's other research that says, no, no, it's not. Just look at what it's doing here. The last couple research studies have come out are more on the positive side, but something to be aware of. Um, Typically, people are microdosing with either psilocybin, magic mushrooms, or LSD, but people microdose with a whole bunch of things. Those are the two most common. And then there's really two ways to microdose. So there's the Dr. Fadiman protocols and the Paul Stamets, the famous mushroom expert mycologist, his protocol. So the Fadiman protocol says this: take it on day 1, it's still in your body on day two, it's going to flush out of your body on day 3, and take it again on day 4. 1, skip, 4. And then every 4 weeks or so, take a couple weeks off. So that's what he recommends. And he is an expert in this and has written the psychedelic handbook, and just a really brilliant man. Paul Stamets, also a brilliant man, says, that's complicated. Why don't you take it 4 days in a row and then take off for 3 days? And just like Fadiman, every 4 weeks, take a couple weeks off. The other difference between what Paul Stamets is recommending and what Fadiman recommends is Stamets says, and it's even better if you add to your mushrooms, your magic mushrooms, add some lion's mane and add some niacin. And the combination of those three substances together will do extra things for your cognition, dexterity, and all sorts of things. So those are the two primary methods of microdosing. If anyone wants this, by the way, I have a free guide to microdosing on my website. If they just go to mattzemon.com, they can just download the microdosing guide. But it's also certainly, of course, in the book, so they can do it that way as well.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess I was mistaken on the differences. Like I've just never really explored microdosing at all. So it is something completely different than going on a journey using it to kind of mind altering. And I guess the reason people would choose microdosing might be different than somebody that's going through PTSD and has treatment resistant PTSD, right? I guess, are we talking like performance enhancement? Is there some kind of like pull in that arena? Like, oh, if you want to be a more effective entrepreneur or business owner, or maybe even athlete or something like that, then you explore microdosing? Or is this one of those, I guess, open my eyes? Why might people shoot for microdosing or begin exploring it?
Yeah, I think the theory came out of this. Okay, if I know a macro dose can do all these things for me, what if I just take a little bit regularly? Does that keep this momentum going? So there could be a medicalization reason. Hey, I don't want to do
Yeah.
antidepressants, but I think if I microdose, I can achieve a similar effect. Or there's a human biohacking is what I would call it, camp
Okay.
that's like, okay, I want to optimize me, and this is a
Yeah.
way to optimize. Okay, I get that. Um, the macro dosing, when you're talking about a full on psychedelic journey, that also can be approached. There again, the medical, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have a substance use challenge, and I want to work on it. Boom. It can be the religious approach. I want to have a different, deeper relationship with my higher power, and by macrodosing, I can get there. And then there's the decriminalization movement, which says, you know what, doesn't matter. It should all be legal. You can't make plants illegal. Therefore, it should be legal, and let adults figure out what they want to do as adults. I get all three camps. They all make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, and I guess so there's really no way to decouple this, I guess, in maybe in my mind and people that might be listening, but you've brought it up a couple of times, like the decriminalization movement, and not to throw drug culture like under the bus, but like it is pretty linked. So I guess like for people that are involved on the health side of things, maybe they're licensed clinicians, maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're treating people that might, it's not their area of specialization, but maybe their clients or their patients are exploring or bringing up in treatment sessions that they're exploring psychedelics and beginning to use them. That has a lot of baggage, right? Like a lot of, oh, are you getting involved in underground movements and the drug culture and all of that? So are they, and you've referenced studies in the past, so what kind of resources are out there maybe for clinicians who don't have any experience in this at all? Maybe they're hearing about it from patients and their first initial instinct is, oh, whoa, let's put the brakes on here. Are there resources out there and available that are, evidence-based, that have good, scientific rigor, and that we can point to and say, okay, this isn't like a case study of Raffi in his closet doing, psilocybin or something like that. Like this has some integrity to it, and it's published and peer reviewed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for, all the clinicians, because they grew up just like we did.
Yeah.
The medical establishment and the media and everybody told us these drugs are bad. And it's hard to fight against 50 years of propaganda. And it's so weird to think that, like, when we think about propaganda, it's like Cuba has propaganda and Russia has
Yeah.
propaganda. And we all think that, oh, wait, we have a lot of propaganda here in this country. So I have a lot of sympathy for them. And the question of, like, where can they go get peer reviewed, evidence backed data? And there's a number of sources they can. Again, PubMed alone, if you type in psychedelics, you're going to find, and whatever you're looking at, whatever your interest is, psychedelics and autism, psychedelics and substance use, you're going to find lots and lots of peer reviewed publications from places like Johns Hopkins. and you can read them and you can then decide, um, what does this mean? And that's kind of the point of my book. And if so, I wrote the book not for that clinician. I wrote the book for the everyman, the person who doesn't have a scientific background. But it was super important to me to make sure all the references were in there. So if we said,
Yeah.
um, ibogaine has a higher risk of cardiac events than traditional antidepressants, so that's a negative. Where did we get that information from? Here's the reference. So if you're looking at ibogaine and you're curious about cardiac events, you can go find the paper yourself if you want to. And if you're not that kind of reader, that's fine too. Skip past the reference and move on. But I try to do both where anybody can read it, so it's not too technical, it's not too opinionated, it's not too woo-woo. It's written for everybody.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of thick references in books because I'm one of those people that's like making notes. I'm like, I'm gonna go look at that later. I'm gonna go read that later. Um, okay, so we've kind of gotten over I guess the maybe even the stigma and how, since this is one of those things we're hearing a little bit more of. You mentioned biohacking. I remember hearing maybe a couple years ago, um, I can't remember. Maybe it was on Joe Rogan or something. Like one of these
Mhm.
big popular podcasts, like somebody talking about microdosing LSD and what it's done for them. And there is some headway where this is making its way more into the mainstream. Um, I guess from a standpoint of the everyman who's maybe not a clinician and just hearing this, um, what are some recommendations you would have when people are beginning to explore the use of psychedelics, whether it be for microdosing or for treating real PTSD or trauma or something like that? Because I imagine there's a lot of snake oil out there, and then there's a lot of trusted sources, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, I think the questions are actually very similar, regardless of whether you're going to a legal ketamine provider. And I want to quickly correct something. Oregon and Colorado both have ballot initiatives that have passed that have decriminalized a number of psychedelics and created the framework for a legalized psychedelic medical industry in their states. So when
Oh,
I say
okay.
that ketamine is the only legal, it's the only legal across the country. But Oregon is already up and running with this medical model, and Colorado is they have a 2-year window to figure out the rules to play before their medical model kicks in. But it's exciting to see states passing ballot initiatives to say our citizens need access to these medicines. Um, oh my gosh, I just lost track of the question. So what was the question?
Somebody that's just kind of getting exposed to
That's right.
this, like how do you tease out what's snake oil and what's tried and true or something that's trustworthy, right?
So I think the first question that you would ask the provider, whoever, so legal or illegal, is what's your experience? How long have you been doing this? Um, what's the medicine? Why do you believe in whatever medicine that you're saying that we're going to use? And they should point you to, okay, I'm ketamine, and go to this website, to the science page, and read all you want about ketamine and educate yourself. Um, or I'm promoting psilocybin, and these are the benefits, and here's where you can go to read about psilocybin for whatever purpose. Asking how many people am I going to do this with? So sometimes at the higher end experiences, yeah, you might have a one-on-one session with a therapist, or a 1-on-2. Sometimes they have 2 people in the room. Okay, that's exciting. But many people think group is actually the better way to have these experiences. And then it's just a definition of what's a good group size. So some people believe it should be under 10 or under 20. Others say 40, and we'll have this many facilitators per person. And then there are um, larger, popular psychedelic retreats that have 80 to 100.
Oh, wow.
I'm not saying anyone is wrong or anyone's right, but just at least ask the question so that you can decide what's right for you. What's going to be your staff to participant ratio and whatever I'm doing? Do you have a medical plan in case there's an adverse event? Let me just jump on that for a second.
Yeah.
Psychedelics as a medicine are relatively very, very safe. There's not a lot of physiological things that can happen to you. There's no lethal dose of mushrooms, as an example.
Yeah. You're not
Separate
going to
out
stop
ibogaine.
breathing or something because of it.
Yeah, typically that's not the issue. The issue is just life happens, period. People have heart attacks and trip and fall, and all sorts of things happen during life, and it's just more complicated if life happens while you're on illegal substance, or while you're in an alternate, a non-ordinary state of consciousness. So having somebody there who is a sober participant, so should something go wrong, they can help you. And that something going wrong can be a, oh, I didn't realize I had to go to the bathroom, to I got sick, to something more severe. So what's the plan if something goes wrong is a great question to ask. Um, and then we talked about source, and then what are the rules for participation? Is there a philosophy that I'm signing up for with this? So those are the types of questions I would ask going into, regardless of whether you're going to a legal practitioner or an illegal. There are legal practitioners who believe it's purely biochemical. No, they're going to say, no, you come in, I'm going to put an IV in you. We're going to take your vitals. We're going to monitor you. We're going to let you afterwards stay here for a while, and then you're on your own. And again, that's just their belief. That's their practice. And there's others that say, oh, no, 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 no. You start with 3 sessions in advance of preparation therapy or of guidance. We do an intentional exercise. You come into this experience, you go through the experience, and then the day after you meet and we integrate the experience, and then you do 3 other sessions following that. Okay, that's their philosophy. So know what you're buying, because the price is not necessarily changing based on the amount of services you get. It's
Yeah.
definitely a buyer beware of, or and buyer just be aware
Yeah.
of what you're looking for.
Yeah. And I'm assuming there are like studies, right, that would break down maybe the difference between kind of what you just laid out, where we're going to do some sessions beforehand, we're going to do a couple, maybe one experience and then integrate it afterwards, versus all over. Like you said, PubMed probably has thousands of articles on this,
Thousands, but
breaking
there's
down the
no,
different protocols.
yeah, the research is pretty clear that the best outcomes come with a combination of um, preparation, the psychedelic experience, and integration. And the integration can vary in how it's delivered, but that's where the best outcomes. Can you have just a biochemical reaction and make it work? Sure, of course you can. But we're talking about how do we increase the likelihood of success for whatever it is that's drawing you there. This is the best practice that research shows over and over. And Johns Hopkins, again, you keep coming back to them because they've just published so much
Yeah.
on best practices for psychedelic experiences.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, we're getting near the bottom here. So Matt, thanks so much for taking the time. This is one of those areas where, they didn't teach us about this in school, so I might have more questions now than before. before, um, if there are just one or two main takeaways you'd want a listener to walk away with from the show, maybe they're a clinician or they run a small private practice, um, and they're hearing their patients talk about psychedelics, or they've come across it and they're kind of curious. What are one or two main takeaways you'd want them to know after listening to this?
I would love them to walk away saying, okay, I didn't realize that I've been fed propaganda for 50 years. And so that maybe my beliefs about drugs might be worth exploring a little bit more deeply. Okay, so that's step 1. And then step 2 is I don't need to think that I need to take a psychedelic to understand how psychedelics might be helpful to others. So if I can separate myself from my belief about this woo boogeyman psychedelic and say, okay, I can see how it could help this person or that person, this person I love, or this or society as a whole, that can impact how I vote, how I talk about mental health, how I think, how I look at somebody who I hear has taken a psychedelic. Um, we have a lot of we have 50 years of information inside of us, and it's just a different way of thinking. And I would just hope that people would come away a little bit open-minded to at least explore this, even if it's not for them specifically to take one, is what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Matt, thanks so much. Where can people? I know we mentioned the book, we mentioned the website, but mention it again so people can find you. Where can people find you? Find the book, um, book you for speaking engagement, or whatever you happen to have
Sure, I
available.
appreciate that. So mattzemon.com is my website. There's a speaking forum and lots of videos on different psychedelics are on that, the free guide to microdosing. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and on Instagram. So and I'm here to serve. So if somebody has a question, I'm accessible. Reach out and I'll do my best to get back to you in a reasonable amount of time and see if I can answer that question. And then the
Awesome.
book is anywhere books are sold, and then there is the audiobook. So for people who don't want the physical and they just want to listen, the Audible or iTunes store, all those have the audiobook now.
Yeah. And the book is called Psychedelics for Everyone, correct?
That is it.
All righty. And we'll link to all that in the show notes. So, Matt, thanks so much. Have a good one.
Rafi, thank you so much. Have a good night.